Britain is engaged in military action for the first time since Iraq. Welcome to Young Voters Question Time. With me tonight, the former UN commander in Bosnia and now a Tory MP, Bob Stewart, Labour's candidate for London Mayor, Ken Livingstone, Joe Swinson for the Lib Dems, Vice President of the Stop the War Coalition, George Galloway is here, and the art critic, Brian Sewell. Thank you, good evening and welcome to Young Voters Question Time here in London. We've got an audience of under 25s and this is their chance to quiz the politicians direct. And you can get involved by going on to Twitter and Facebook. Details are on the screen now and we'll read some of those out during the course of the programme this evening. Let's hear the first question and it's from Samira Musa.
Is the recent US plane crash in Libya a sign that Western forces intervening there will only create another catastrophe that was Iraq?
OK, and I should say as well, so we're completely live here on BBC Three tonight, and here's the very latest line on Libya. The Libyan Air Force no longer exists as a fighting force. That is according to the commander of British aircraft operating over Libya. The Libyan Air Force no longer exists as a fighting force. Let's go to George Galloway, first of all.
Well, these kind of hubristic boastings are almost guaranteed to backfire. If another American plane comes down, we'll know that that's not quite as true as the military spokesman today said. Even worse, after the American plane came down and the villagers near Benghazi who came out to rescue the American pilots, 6 of them were shot and one's had his arm amputated by the American commandos who didn't understand their intentions, which just goes to show the law of unintended consequences. No military plan survives first contact with the enemy, and this one won't either. It's going nowhere. It's costing us £3 million a day on the day that the Tory Chancellor laid waste to hundreds of thousands of British jobs, butchered more British public services. It turns out we've got £3 million a day to spend throwing Tomahawk cruise missiles at $1 million a time at a North African country. And Richard said it's the first time we've been in military action since Iraq. That long, huh? But actually, we've been in military action every day since Iraq. It's called Afghanistan. We're already in enough war.
Obviously, I meant a new theatre of war. But you mentioned the 6 people that were shot. It is worth saying that the father of the boy who may have to have his leg amputated has said that he has forgiven the Americans because...
Better him than me. I wouldn't forgive them if they shot my son's leg off, would you?
No, but it's an important point. He wants them there. Well, he thinks they're doing an important job. He thinks it's necessary.
He's probably not got much of a choice over that. But his son's leg was shot off. 6 other people were shot. I'm just making the point that when you're throwing high explosives around the place, don't pretend that there's anything forensic about it, that there's anything targeted about it. I've been in enough medical wards where the victims of surgical precision bombing have been taken, perchance to die, to know that all this propagandistic guff about military weaponry is just one of the big lies of this century.
George, we shouldn't be there at all.
Not at all. We are the colonial power that used to govern in these places.
Bob, we
are the last people in the world who should be invading and bombing other people's
It's an enormous international coalition, though. Just
How enormous is it?
Well,
name names.
Well, let me address that in a moment. An audience, I know you're keen to come in, and we will come to you plenty during this live programme tonight. Bob Stewart, first of all, would you like to respond to George Galloway?
I watched civilians bombed to bits in Sarajevo in 92-93 from the hills around Sarajevo with heavy weapons. I felt impotent, I felt angry. Last week, it reminded me that we might have another Sarajevo in Benghazi. If we had not gone in to save those people that lived in Benghazi and elsewhere on the instructions of the United Nations Security Council, which is the highest authority in the world, with the approval of those people who seem to be against Gaddafi, and with the approval of the Arab League. I thought this week we might be seeing huge numbers of people blown up again, and I just couldn't live with that. And I tell you this, I have seen what happens when brutes use weapons against civilians, and that, for me, was the nightmare scenario. We've gone in there to save lives. Do you not agree with that?
Just to be absolutely clear, you would have left the people of Benghazi to their fate. The tanks were on the outskirts of Benghazi. Gaddafi had said he would go house to house, door to door, and show these people no mercy, and you would have left them to die.
Don't give me that. The same
What do you mean,
people,
don't give you that?
the
What's
same
inaccurate about
people
that?
that are bombing for human rights in Libya are killing people in Pakistan and Afghanistan on a daily basis. And you've just brought into your vast coalition Saudi Arabia, the Saudi Arabian Air Force, bombing for human rights when it's killing its own demonstrators and has just invaded Bahrain to kill theirs.
But the answer
is your hypocrisy. It's absolute
It's a perfectly valid point.
It's absolute hypocrisy.
Well, the answer is...
Some people can be killed, other people have to be saved. I wonder what the difference is. It's got 3 letters. It begins with O, it ends in L, and the middle letter is I.
So, therefore, the answer is yes, you would have left the people of Benghazi to their fate.
I wouldn't have armed Gaddafi in the first place. When I was telling the BBC that Gaddafi was the same criminal today as he was last year and 10 years before, the BBC was singing off the same hymn sheet as Tony Blair and the Labour government ministers.
This is a different point.
It's not a different point. He wouldn't have the tanks if we hadn't sold them to him. He wouldn't have the training of his special forces if we hadn't trained them.
Given that happened, we had an urgent situation where the tanks were on the outskirts of the town. You'd have left them to it. 1,600
Palestinians were killed to death from the sky by Israel. And you never asked for a no-fly zone once. And you never will ask for a no-fly zone once.
The rest of the panel, I'll be with you in a moment. So many hands up, so many people willing to talk to us. Yes, gentleman there in the tracksuit top in the middle.
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I think the situation is pretty simple. What gives the West the right to say what they're saying when, you look back in history, they're the ones that, if essentially brown-nosing Gaddafi for 30, 40 years, they're the ones that supplied him with the weapons, all the money, for the sake of what? A bit of oil. And now one day he rebels and says, I'm not going to give you the oil. All of a sudden they're, saying, hey, let's get him out. I think it's just a load of hypocrisy.
He said he was going to kill the people of Benghazi, didn't he?
Yeah, but he's been killing them for years. Robert Mugabe's been killing his people. Palestine...
Wasn't this more urgent?
I think, to be honest, the government is just talking a lot of rubbish, really, because they don't really care.
Gentleman there in the black jacket, hello there, good evening.
Yeah, I understand George's points about the disparity in terms of foreign policy with Mugabe, Israel, Saudi Arabia, but I'd like him to actually answer the question. And what would you do? What should be done? Should no forces have gone in, or should forces have gone in from another country or some other country? But what would you have done? Answer the question.
Arabs have a right to be there. Egypt has a right to be there.
We asked them to be there, George.
Has to be there.
We asked them.
I called on them to open their borders right at the start of this revolution. I'm a supporter of the Libyan revolution before David Cameron supported it. The difference is, I'm a supporter of all the Arab revolutions. He definitely isn't.
Let's hear from some other panellists. Brian Shule.
To me, there's one very simple issue, and that is the delay before we intervened. We watched things happen. And my experience as a young soldier 60 years ago,
not as long as that.
Well, pretty well, was that if you were going to do something, you did it quickly and efficiently. You made your plan and you carried it out. You went in and you did whatever you were going to do. We havered for a couple of weeks. We let the situation get out of hand. And only when Benghazi is threatened do we intervene. My view of it is that we either should not have intervened at all, or that we should have done what Sarkozy was dithering about, which was to go in at once. Had we gone in at once, there might have been a foreseeable end to this situation. The way this particular cookie has crumbled is that we see no end, and all the people who are paraded onto the BBC to answer this question, when will it end, say, oh, it's a matter of months rather than weeks. It might be years. And then somebody says, well, the no-fly zone over Iraq was 11 years or 12. Are we going to go on maintaining a no-fly zone for that length of time in Libya?
Well, the Armed Forces Minister was asked yesterday how long this conflict would go on for, and he said, how long is a piece of string?
He's right, too.
Jo Swinson from the Lib Dems, your thoughts?
Well, Samira asked whether this would be like Iraq, and I marched against the war in Iraq. I feel that that war was conducted under false pretences, and it was illegal, and it was immoral. But the situation in Libya is completely different. The difference is we have the public of Libya who have had an uprising to demand their democratic rights. We have regional support through the Arab League. We have a United Nations Security Council resolution, and we had that urgent need that people were going to be slaughtered. A city the size of Glasgow, and Gaddafi had promised that he would go house to house, and the people there knew exactly what he would do. Now, I do understand the issue about the fact that we don't take action in many parts of the world where horrific things are going on. And the world is an imperfect place, and you don't always have all of those situations in place where you can have a United Nations Security Council resolution and consensus from the international community. But where you have a public uprising, you have a dictator who is as mad as Gaddafi is, threatening to massacre his own people, and you have that international consensus and will to act, I don't see how we in all conscience can fail to do so.
You were completely against Iraq, and you are completely in favour.
I'm not excited or glamorising what we're doing in Libya. It is a difficult decision, and you never take a decision like that lightly. And there are clear risks, and it is going to be messy. It's not going to be some neat outcome that we can solve really quickly. But I think that the risks of not acting were far, far greater.
Are you saying that the Lib Dems have dramatically changed their position on something?
To be fair, we argued in Iraq that you needed to do things within the confines of international law and respecting international institutions. And I think that when the United Nations has made a very strong position on this, we also need to respect that.
Okay, let's hear from Ken Livingstone.
Over all my political lifetime, I've watched America and Britain prop up horrendous, brutal, murderous regimes. And they have ignored human rights. I watched the Americans systematically slaughter the Vietnamese people as they fought for their independence. And the only time we've intervened with that, I think, one or two brief exceptions, like Kosovo, which was justified, and we had to drag the Americans screaming into that because there wasn't any oil in Kosovo.
It wasn't any in Bosnia either.
I know, precisely. And so this is about oil. And the rest of the world looks at us as rank hypocrites. If there's a proposal that the UN should be an international police force and intervene to overthrow undemocratic regimes that murder their own people, I'd vote for that. We have sat for 20 years watching Burma after the military overthrew Aung San Suu Kyi, after she won the election. They have slaughtered their own people, they've shot them down, we've done absolutely nothing. When the Khmer Rouge were overthrown, that most monstrous genocidal regime of Pol Pot, what happened? Because it was the Vietnamese that invaded to overthrow him, the British and American governments provided funding for Pol Pot, who had killed 1 million of his own people. This is about power politics and resources.
Bob Stewart, did Ken Livingstone there say a single thing that was inaccurate?
Actually, I agree with what a lot of Ken said, because I was almost in Vietnam myself. I was in Malaya. There is a real problem ladies and gentlemen, with what you do internationally.